The years after the burial were not measured in days, but in shadows. Time became something different, stretched and hollow, a weight pressing down without mercy. The house was quiet in a way that made every breath echo, every step sound too loud, as if the walls themselves were listening to the absence. The bed was the worst place of all. The sheets stayed cold no matter how tightly they were wrapped around, no matter how many blankets tried to replace the warmth that had once been there. The nights felt endless. Lying in darkness, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that rarely came, and when it did, it carried dreams cruel enough to remind of what was missing the moment the eyes opened again. The silence had a voice of its own. It whispered in the empty kitchen chair, in the untouched side of the bed, in the photographs that smiled from the mantel, but offered nothing back. Every morning began with the same ache, a heaviness in the chest that never lifted, and every night ended with the same longing, the kind that ached deeper than loneliness. It wasn't just the heart that was starved, it was the body too. The body remembered the way it once melted into strong arms, the way it once belonged to warmth, the way it once felt wanted, but now it had no choice but to pretend that desire was buried alongside the love once shared, pretend that touch no longer mattered. There were moments when the loneliness was unbearable, the kind where the hands shook for no reason, the kind where even breathing felt like too much. Friends tried to fill the space with visits, with laughter, with carefully chosen words of comfort. But when the door closed behind them, the silence came rushing back, heavier than before, reminding that nothing could replace what had been lost. Time passed, and still the silence clung like a second skin. Nights were the cruelest, darkness pressed in, and memories grew sharper. The body remembered how it once turned instinctively toward warmth, a space beside on the bed that was now only air. Sometimes a pillow was clutched, sometimes the blanket pulled tight, but it never worked. Nothing carried the scent of safety, nothing carried the weight of another heartbeat, and so the nights stretched out, empty and aching, filled with the sound of nothing but shallow breaths. The longing was a secret shame. It felt wrong to admit that the body still craved touch, that the skin still ached for fingertips, that the lips still remembered how to hunger. It felt like betrayal, to want something again after loss had taken so much. So the desire was buried deep, hidden beneath layers of guilt and silence, pushed away as if denying it could make it disappear. But it never did. It only grew heavier with time. There were mornings when waking felt crueler than sleeping. Dreams offered fragments, sometimes a voice, sometimes the warmth of a hand brushing against the cheek. But waking took it all away, leaving behind only the coldness of an empty room. The mirror reflected someone older, someone tired, someone worn thin by grief and nights without touch. And yet, beneath the tired eyes, there was still a spark, a quiet plea, though it felt too dangerous to acknowledge. The days blurred, and the years carried that same hollow rhythm. The heart still beat, the body still breathed, but living felt like an echo of what it once was. A shadow moving through the world, keeping the mask steady for others, but collapsing into silence when no one was watching. And in that silence, the truth was undeniable. The truth that love had not died completely. The truth that the body still longed to be held. The truth that warmth was missed more than words could admit. There was guilt in even feeling it. Guilt in every memory that turned soft with desire instead of sharp with grief. Guilt in the way the body betrayed the heart by remembering what it once had. But no matter how deep the guilt buried it, the longing remained. It throbbed like a pulse beneath the skin, constant and unyielding, whispering reminders that silence could never satisfy. And so the nights stretched on, long and heavy, while the body ached in secret, and the heart clung to what little pieces of memory it could. It was not just loneliness, it was something deeper. A hunger not just for companionship, but for connection, for skin against skin, for a heartbeat close enough to silence the void. That was the weight of silence after loss. It was more than grief, more than emptiness. It was the cold that settled into the bones, the longing that pressed against the chest, the ache that whispered through every quiet room. It was the silence that could not be broken, no matter how hard the world tried to fill it. And in that silence, the body learned to pretend, to move through the days as if desire had died too, to smile when others were near, to laugh when expected, to nod when spoken to. But inside, the shadows remained heavy and unrelenting, reminding that the heart still longed, the body still remembered, and the silence could never truly be enough. That was the truth I carried. The truth that silence was not just absence. It was hunger. It was longing. It was the cruel reminder of everything that had once been alive. And no matter how many years passed, the silence never let me forget what it felt like to be touched, to be loved, to be held. The silence was heavier than grief itself, because grief was a wound. Silence was the scar that never healed. It happened so simply that night, without planning, without thought. Just two people sitting together in a quiet room, the air heavy with memories that neither of us dared to say aloud. His presence had always been steady, a familiar anchor through storms that felt impossible to bear. He had been there during the funeral, standing slightly behind, close enough to catch me if my legs gave out. He had been there in the months after, checking in, not with the hollow words others gave, but with a silence that didn't demand answers. There was comfort in that silence, a kind of ease in knowing he understood what others didn't. I didn't see it coming. The moment when his arms finally wrapped around me was supposed to be harmless. A friend's embrace, warm, steady, meant to calm the tears that I had tried so hard to swallow back. His shirt smelled faintly of soap and faint traces of cologne, and for the first time in years I let myself lean against something solid. My body melted into his without thought, without hesitation, as if it had been waiting all along. At first it was only comfort, the kind that sinks into your bones when you've been cold too long, the kind that lets the breath escape heavy from the chest because someone else is carrying the weight for a moment. But then something shifted. The embrace lingered a second longer than it should have, his hand pressing firmly against my back, as if he was afraid I might pull away. My heart betrayed me in that instant. It began to race, not with grief, but with something I thought had been buried long ago. My body betrayed me too. Every inch of me was awake, alive, burning with a hunger I hadn't allowed myself to feel. The warmth of his hand seared through the thin fabric of my blouse, spreading across my skin like fire. His cheek brushed against my temple as he whispered words meant to soothe, but all I could feel was the heat of his breath so close to my ear. My body remembered things I had forced it to forget, the safety of being held, the intimacy of closeness, the electric rush of skin against skin. A hunger stirred that I could no longer deny. I should have pulled back. I should have created distance, reminded myself that he was only here to comfort, that anything more would be crossing a line too sacred to imagine. But I didn't. I leaned closer instead. The tears that had been flowing freely slowed, replaced by a different ache, one that tightened in my chest and spread downward. My lips parted without words, my breath caught, and I felt the tension between us coil tighter and tighter. It was in his eyes when I finally lifted mine to meet his. That hesitation, that conflict, the same guilt mirrored in the same hunger. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth was already between us, written in the way neither of us let go, in the way his thumb brushed once across my shoulder, as if testing how far this embrace could go before it broke. Time stretched in that moment. My heart thundered so loud I thought he could hear it. Every inch of my skin was aware of him, every nerve alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. And when his hand cupped the side of my face, gently, tenderly, I didn't move away. I leaned into it. The warmth of his palm against my cheek made me close my eyes, made me forget the years of silence, made me forget the cold. For the first time since burying my love, I felt wanted again. The danger of it made it all the more consuming. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be the one to wake me up, to remind me what it felt like to be seen, to be touched, and yet I couldn't stop it. The closer he held me, the more my body ached for what I had been starving for. It wasn't just comfort anymore. It was need, raw and undeniable. My lips trembled, not from grief this time, but from the pull that drew them dangerously close to his. His breath mingled with mine, shallow and uneven, and I knew he felt the same storm raging within him. There was guilt, yes, but beneath the guilt was something so much stronger: desire, longing. A connection that had been waiting quietly, building in the shadows of grief until it could no longer be ignored. His embrace tightened, and I let out a soft, broken sound that wasn't sadness but release. My hands, trembling, gripped the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, afraid he might let go, afraid this might end before it even began. But he didn't. He stayed, holding me like he was holding something fragile, something precious, yet something he wanted with every breath. That was the moment everything changed. What began as comfort turned into something dangerous, something forbidden, something that carried both guilt and salvation in the same breath. His arms were no longer just steady, they were claiming. His warmth was no longer just reassurance, it was ignition, and in that embrace I was no longer lost in grief. I was alive again. I should have been afraid of what it meant, of what it could destroy, of how it blurred the lines between loyalty and longing. But all I could think about was the way it felt to be wanted again, the way it felt to be seen not as broken, not as fragile, but as a woman whole and alive. When his lips brushed the side of my forehead, lingering just long enough to steal my breath, I knew we had crossed into something we could never turn back from. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also undeniable. And in that moment, danger felt like salvation, because after years of silence, years of aching loneliness, I was finally reminded of what it meant to be held, to be touched, to be alive. It started with glances, simple enough to excuse, but heavy enough to haunt. Eyes that lingered just a second too long, a gaze that spoke of things neither of us dared to say aloud. Every time it happened, I told myself to look away, to pretend it was nothing, but the truth was clear in the way my heart quickened, in the way heat spread through me as if I had been caught doing something forbidden. That weight of silence hung between us, thick and undeniable, making every meeting feel like walking the edge of something dangerous. There were moments when the smallest brush of his hand against mine would unravel me completely. A touch that could have been an accident, a shift too close on the couch, fingers grazing as he passed me a glass. But each one set fire beneath my ribs, sparking through me with a hunger I tried to smother. I told myself it was wrong, that I couldn't, that I shouldn't. And yet, when his arm lingered close, when his shoulder pressed against mine, I leaned in instead of pulling away. My body betrayed me every time, craving more when my mind screamed it was enough. The guilt was sharp, piercing, relentless. It whispered late at night when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, when I pressed my face into the pillow and felt the ache pulse through me. Guilt told me this wasn't love, that it couldn't be, that I was betraying everything I once held sacred. But desire was louder. Desire burned, clawed, demanded to be felt. It reminded me of how long it had been since I had been wanted, how long it had been since lips had pressed against mine, since hands had moved across my skin with hunger. Desire didn't care about rules or promises made long ago. Desire only cared about the present moment, about the way my body came alive under his gaze. It felt cruel at times, the way I was torn between the two. One moment I would swear to myself I would stop, that I would distance, that I would build the wall higher so there was no way for temptation to climb. But then he would look at me, really look at me, with that intensity that stripped away every layer I had built, and I would crumble. The longing in his eyes mirrored my own, and it was impossible to deny that we were both fighting the same storm, both caught in the same pull, both suffocating under the weight of what we couldn't stop. There were nights I sat alone, trembling with the ache of it, remembering the way his hand had rested against my back just a little too long, the way his lips had almost touched mine when we said good night. I replayed it in my mind over and over, guilty for wanting it, guilty for imagining it, guilty for the way my body stirred just from the memory, and yet the guilt never once stopped the wanting. If anything, it made it stronger. The forbidden edge made every stolen glance sharper, every touch more intoxicating. The hunger grew until it consumed me. I found myself anticipating moments I shouldn't have. I found myself wondering when his hand might brush mine again, when his shoulder might press against me, when his eyes might linger just long enough to make me forget everything else. It was dangerous, and I knew it, but it was also irresistible. Like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands, I had no chance of stopping it. The war between guilt and desire tore me apart, leaving me restless, aching, caught in a storm with no escape. I felt both condemned and alive, condemned by the thought of betrayal, by the ghost of the love I had once buried, by the promises that whispered in my conscience, but alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, alive in every nerve, every breath, every desperate thrum of my heart when he was near. The storm raged hardest when we were alone, when the silence wrapped around us and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, the sound of his close by, steady and heavy, betraying the same hunger I felt. Those moments stretched unbearably, and I would feel myself shaking, torn between pulling away and leaning closer. Every time I leaned closer, it was the look in his eyes that undid me completely. A look that spoke of restraint barely holding, of desire clawing to be released, of the same guilt that burned me alive. It was there, every time, waiting, daring, aching, and in those eyes I saw myself reflected, raw and unguarded. I tried to tell myself that it was wrong, that I could stop, that if I only turned away, if I only built the wall higher, it would go away. But desire doesn't go away. It grows, it waits, it builds until it demands to be answered. And so every stolen glance carried weight, every accidental touch burned like fire, every lingering silence screamed of what we both wanted but didn't dare to name. The ache of guilt clawed at me, but the hunger of desire pulled harder, leaving me with only one truth. There was no escape but surrender. It began in silence, in the simple comfort of being held when the world felt too heavy to stand alone. There was no intention that night, no thought of crossing the line that separated friendship from something deeper. It was only an embrace steady and warm, a reminder that I was not as alone as I felt. But the moment stretched, and in that stillness something shifted inside me. The ache that had lived buried beneath years of grief and loneliness stirred, and the body remembered what it had been forced to forget. At first, I fought it. I told myself it was only comfort, that nothing more could be allowed, that I was only leaning into a memory of love that had been lost. But when his arms tightened, when his breath brushed against my cheek, when his eyes lingered just a second too long, the wall inside me cracked. The hunger that had been silenced for years pressed forward, demanding to be felt, and I let it. My skin came alive under his touch, every nerve remembering what it meant to be desired, what it meant to be seen not as broken, but as whole. Nights followed where words became unnecessary. We spoke in silence, in the way his hand found mine in the dark, in the way I leaned into his chest and listened to the steady rhythm of his heart. That rhythm became my anchor, a sound that reminded me I was alive, that reminded me I was still capable of being wanted. The first time his lips brushed against mine, it was hesitant, almost fragile, but it carried the weight of everything we had buried. That kiss unraveled me. It stripped away the years of loneliness, the nights of emptiness, the belief that love had ended with a coffin. The passion between us grew in quiet rebellion. Every stolen touch, every lingering kiss fed something deeper than desire. My body awakened under him, yes, but so did my soul. I found myself laughing again, not the shallow laughter meant to fill silence, but laughter that rose from somewhere deep, laughter I thought I had lost forever. I found myself breathing differently, lighter, freer, as though his presence had unclenched something in me that had been locked for too long. It wasn't just lust that consumed us, though the hunger was fierce and undeniable. It was the way he looked at me as though I was something precious, something worth holding, something worth breaking rules for. It was the way he traced my skin like it was a map he had been waiting years to discover. It was the way he whispered my name, not with pity, not with sorrow, but with a raw reverence that made me feel alive in ways I hadn't thought possible again. There was guilt, of course, but guilt became quieter the more time we spent together. Desire drowned it out, love buried it. In his arms, guilt felt like a distant voice, while the sound of his heartbeat against mine was undeniable, real, present. Each night we shared was not only the release of hunger, but the rebirth of something I thought was gone forever. The love that had been buried rose again, not in the same shape, not in the same form, but just as powerful, just as true. I found myself craving not only the touch of his body, but the presence of his soul. The way he listened to me, really listened, with eyes that held mine as though nothing else in the world mattered. The way he carried both tenderness and intensity in equal measure, making me feel safe and desired at once. The way he unraveled me with a single kiss and then steadied me with a single word. What we shared could never have been explained to anyone else. To the world, it might have looked like betrayal, like weakness, like something forbidden. But to me, it was salvation. It was the return of color to a life that had been drained of it. It was fire in a heart that had been frozen too long. It was love reborn in arms I never expected to find, love that demanded no permission, love that silenced the doubts with every touch, every kiss, every breathless moment between us. Each night became both surrender and awakening. Surrender to the hunger that had grown too strong to deny, awakening to the truth that passion does not die with age, that desire does not vanish with loss, that love does not end with death. Love changes, love waits, and when it finds you again, it comes with a force you cannot resist. The comfort that began so simply became the most dangerous, beautiful, unstoppable truth of my life. I did not plan it, I did not seek it, but I could not turn from it. Because in his arms I found not just passion, not just the ache of being desired, but the soul, deep certainty that love had found me again in the most unexpected way. It wasn't just lust, it was love reborn, raw and deep, and once it awakened, nothing could stop it. If these stories stir something inside you, stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a moment of raw confession, forbidden longing, and love reborn in unexpected arms. Until the next story, let the silence remind you passion never dies. It only waits to be awakened.